What image comes to mind when you hear the word nomad? For many, it's a vision of fierce riders galloping across the steppes, arrows raining down on helpless cities, the embodiment of chaos crashing against the walls of civilization. Genghis Khan, Attila the Hun, Timur the Lame, names that echo through history as destroyers rather than builders. But what if this picture, dramatic as it may be, is only half the truth?
History is not just the past. It is the greatest story ever told. From the rise of mighty empires to their fiery collapse, history has shaped the world in ways that continue to amaze us. From warriors who carved kingdoms to revolutions that changed the course of civilization, every moment holds a story worth remembering. From ancient wonders like the Great Wall and Da Vinci's timeless sketches, to humanity reaching for the stars with the Apollo 11 mission, the journey of mankind is nothing short of extraordinary. This channel brings history to life through fast-paced stories, cinematic storytelling, and epic journeys across time. We explore battles, betrayals, inventions, and legends, the defining moments that shaped who we are today. If you have ever wanted to see history as if you were truly there, you have found the right place. Step into the past, relive the greatest stories ever lived, and join our journey through time. Subscribe now.
Because hidden beneath the smoke of burning cities lies a different story, one rarely told, but perhaps far more consequential. What if these so-called barbarians were not simply raiders, but architects of systems so advanced that we still live within their shadow today? Let's step inside the tent of history, past the stereotypes, past the dust and blood, and open the flaps to see what lies within. The nomadic empires of Eurasia were not defined by permanent capitals of stone, but by movement, flexibility, and vision. Where others saw endless plains, they saw pathways. Where others saw wilderness, they saw opportunity. And through this perspective, they forged something extraordinary: networks that connected worlds, innovations that surpassed settled kingdoms, and methods of governance that remain surprisingly relevant. Consider this: how do you manage an empire without walls? How do you govern millions without palaces, or rule diverse peoples when your throne is carried on horseback? To the sedentary mind, such a feat might seem impossible. Yet nomadic rulers accomplished it, not through brute force alone, but through innovations in logistics, communication, and administration. Think of their postal systems, mounted couriers racing across vast distances, carrying intelligence at speeds unmatched by any sedentary rival. A message sent by Genghis Khan could travel from the Caspian Sea to China in just days. Compare that to the fractured communications of Europe at the same time, and the difference is staggering. This wasn't chaos, it was precision. And logistics? Their mastery of mobility wasn't simply about military campaigns, it was about sustaining life in the harshest environments, finding ways to make scarcity into strength. Herding strategies, portable dwellings, and rotational grazing systems created a society that could thrive where others could not. Their mobility was not weakness, it was resilience. Even their governance challenges our assumptions. The Mongols, the Xiongnu, the Scythians, these were not just warlords, they were negotiators, coalition builders, and visionaries. They bound together multi-ethnic populations into federations that, against all odds, endured. But here is the twist. Much of their story was not written by them. Their narratives were recorded by their enemies. Cities they toppled, kingdoms they humbled, rivals who remembered only the fear. History painted them as destroyers because destruction was what left the deepest scars. Yet what about the ideas they seeded, the systems they pioneered, the bridges they built across continents? What if the true legacy of nomadic empires is not ruin, but connection? Not ashes, but architecture, an invisible framework that continues to hold our world together. Because the deeper we look, the more the story shifts. Those mounted raiders, who once seemed like the end of civilization, may in fact have been the catalysts of a new kind of global order. So the question is this: if we strip away the myths and see them not as destroyers but as innovators, how does that change our understanding of the world we live in today? But this is just the beginning. To truly grasp how nomadic life still shapes us, we must follow their greatest gift to the world, a network that stretched across continents and transformed the way humanity exchanged goods, ideas, and power. And that story begins on the Silk Road. The Silk Road, the very name conjures images of caravans winding across deserts, merchants bargaining in crowded bazaars, spices and silks flowing between east and west. But here's the truth: without the nomads of the steppes, this artery of world history might never have existed as we know it.
Settled empires built cities, but nomadic empires built connections. The Silk Road wasn't a single road. It was a vast web of routes, stretching thousands of miles, from the shores of the Pacific to the markets of the Mediterranean. And who controlled the spaces between? The nomads. The so-called wilderness was their home, their network, their empire. Think about the challenge. Trade requires safety, speed, and trust. A merchant carrying silk from China to Persia could not afford to gamble with his life at every mountain pass. Bandits lurked everywhere, rival states threatened, and geography itself conspired against him. Yet under the rule of powerful nomadic empires, the steppe became a zone of unprecedented stability. The Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace, turned one of the most dangerous journeys in history into a functioning highway of goods and ideas. Merchants could cross entire continents with papers stamped by Mongol authorities guaranteeing their safety. Relay stations offered fresh horses, food, and shelter. Roads were patrolled. Suddenly, the world seemed smaller. And here is where the story deepens. It wasn't just goods that moved, it was culture, science, religion, and technology. Gunpowder traveled west. Medical knowledge moved east. Ideas like paper money, adopted from the Chinese and spread by the Mongols, revolutionized economies far beyond the steppes. The very foundations of global commerce were laid by hands that many history books still dismiss as barbarian. But what's even striking is how familiar this all feels today. The nomads may be gone, but their logic lives on. Look at our globalized economy. Supply chains that stretch across oceans, warehouses connected by fleets of trucks, ships, and planes. A product ordered in one country arrives at your door in another thanks to a vast network that functions only when trust and communication are maintained. Is that really so different from a merchant caravan moving silk across Asia under Mongol protection? Instead of mounted couriers, we now have satellites tracking shipments in real time. Instead of passports stamped with a Khan's seal, we have digital customs clearances and QR codes. The tools have changed, but the principle remains. Global trade thrives on connectivity, stability, and networks strong enough to transcend borders. Even the innovation of speed, so critical to the nomadic empires, still drives us. The Mongols pioneered relay posts that allowed information to move at unmatched velocity. Today we chase the same dream: instant communication across continents, whether through fiber optic cables or wireless networks. In many ways, the internet itself is the modern Silk Road, an invisible highway where data, ideas, and commerce move at light speed. Yet here's the irony. We rarely give credit to the nomadic past for laying the groundwork of this global present. Instead, history books emphasize the fall of cities, the conquests, the terror. But when you peel back the layers, you find that some of the very principles driving our 21st century economy — speed, security, flexibility, and networks were first tested and refined in the heart of the steppe. So ask yourself this: when you order something online and it arrives at your doorstep in days, are you not, in some sense, living in the world the nomads built? But commerce was only one side of their genius. For if trade forged connections across continents, it was their diplomacy, subtle, strategic, and remarkably modern, that allowed such vast networks to endure. And that brings us to a surprising question. Could the playbook of today's global powers be, unknowingly, borrowed from the horse-riding rulers of the steppe? We often imagine diplomacy as the craft of polished city-states, ambassadors in marble halls, treaties sealed with wax and ceremony. Yet centuries before modern nations rose, the nomadic empires of the steppe practiced a form of diplomacy so sophisticated, so pragmatic, that echoes of it still shape global politics today. How do you rule an empire that stretches thousands of miles, encompassing dozens of languages, religions, and cultures? The answer could never be brute force alone. Conquest might win battles, but survival demanded something deeper: negotiation, adaptation, and a mastery of relationships. Take the Mongol Empire. At its height, it was the largest contiguous land empire in history, spanning from China to Eastern Europe. This was not a monolithic state, but a federation of peoples, from Persians to Chinese, Russians to Central Asians. To hold it together, Mongol rulers forged a delicate balance between tolerance and authority. Local leaders were often left in place so long as they acknowledged Mongol supremacy and paid tribute. Religious freedom was not only allowed, but actively protected. To the Khans, belief systems weren't threats, they were tools of cohesion.
This approach wasn't born from ideology, but necessity. A sedentary empire could crush dissent within city walls. A nomadic empire had no such luxury. Its power was movement, and with movement came fragility. Diplomacy became survival. And so nomadic leaders developed tools we recognize today. Marriage alliances that stitched together rival clans and kingdoms. Hostage exchanges that functioned as guarantees of loyalty. Primitive, perhaps, but effective. Intelligence networks that collected not just military secrets, but cultural knowledge, giving rulers the leverage they needed to negotiate from strength. Even the concept of soft power, a term we often reserve for modern superpowers, has nomadic roots. Rather than impose uniformity, the Mongols absorbed and repurposed local customs, technology, and expertise. They allowed Persians to serve as administrators, Chinese engineers to build, Muslim scholars to teach. Their empire wasn't merely a military conquest, it was a cultural ecosystem. People adapted to Mongol authority not only out of fear, but because it offered opportunities that rival powers could not. Now consider the parallels. Look at today's world. Alliances like NATO, economic blocs like the EU or ASEAN, or even the informal networks of influence that tie nations together. The language has changed, but the logic is strikingly similar. Coalitions built on both strength and compromise. Superpowers wielding cultural influence as much as military might. Rival states balancing diplomacy with intimidation. Think too about how the United States maintains global reach, not by direct conquest, but through bases, treaties, and economic networks that mirror the federative strategies of steppe empires. Or how China's Belt and Road Initiative echoes ancient Silk Road diplomacy, binding nations through infrastructure, trade, and debt, rather than armies. It raises a startling question. Are our modern superpowers, for all their technology and institutions, simply retracing the steps of mounted rulers from centuries past? And there is another dimension, one that unsettles the familiar story. We tend to frame history as a clash between East and West, between civilizations and so-called barbarians.
But what if the steppes were not a barrier, but a bridge? What if the very idea of global geopolitics, the notion that no region exists in isolation, was born from the vision of nomads who refused to be bound by borders? This is the uncomfortable truth. The steppes taught the world that power is not about permanence, but about adaptability. Empires with walls rose and fell, but the mobile ones, fluid, flexible, responsive, reshaped the game. And in many ways, they still do. So the next time we watch world leaders sign treaties, build alliances, or maneuver for influence on the global stage, perhaps we should ask ourselves, are we witnessing modern politics or the distant echo of lessons first learned on horseback? But diplomacy and geopolitics only scratch the surface. To fully understand the nomadic legacy, we must look beyond kings and conquerors to the mindset that defined their way of life, a mindset built on adaptability, resilience, and innovation. And the real shock is this: that same mindset may be quietly shaping how we work, live, and even define success in the 21st century. What does it mean to live as a nomad? Not just to wander, but to thrive in a world where the ground beneath your feet can never be permanent. For centuries, steppe societies were forced to master a reality that others feared. Change was constant, and survival meant bending but not breaking. This mindset of adaptability, resilience, and innovation wasn't a romantic ideal. It was a necessity. On the open steppe, winters could be brutal, summers scorching, resources unpredictable. To endure, nomads had to build lives that could shift with the seasons, with the weather, with the fortunes of the herd. Permanence was a luxury. Flexibility was power. Look at their dwellings, the yurt, a marvel of modular design. Portable, durable, easily assembled or dismantled. It could be carried on camels, rebuilt in hours, and withstand wind and snow. Today, we marvel at tiny homes and modular architecture as innovations for modern living. But for the nomads, this was simply everyday wisdom, designed not for permanence, but for mobility. The same principle shaped their economy. A herding society knew scarcity better than any farmer. If pasture failed in one valley, you moved to another. If one trade route was blocked, you found a new one. This culture of constant adjustment bred an ingenuity that transcended generations. And here's where it touches us today.
Think of the gig economy. Millions of workers now shift between jobs, projects, and clients, moving fluidly across industries rather than staying in one company for life. Remote work has untethered people from offices, making them mobile in ways unthinkable a few decades ago. Even technology itself, laptops, smartphones, portable power, reflects a culture of mobility. We no longer need permanence to function. In fact, our lives are increasingly structured around the ability to move. Is this not, in its essence, a modern form of nomadism? A return, in digital disguise, to a mindset forged long ago on the steppes? But adaptability wasn't only about survival. It was about seizing opportunity. Nomads were innovators not because they invented every tool themselves, but because they could absorb, repurpose, and deploy innovations faster than sedentary states. They took the best from each culture they encountered: Persian administration, Chinese siegecraft, Islamic scholarship, and wove it into something greater. Today, the same principle drives our world. The companies that thrive are not those who invent in isolation, but those who adapt quickly, absorb global talent, and pivot when conditions change. It's not the biggest that survive, but the most flexible. Darwin spoke of evolution in biological terms, but nomads lived it culturally. Even in personal life, this mindset resonates. Consider how we adapt to crises. A global pandemic forcing millions to reinvent work,
education, even social connection overnight. What to one society felt like a collapse, to another was simply a test of resilience. And the ones who thrived were those who carried a nomadic spirit, quick to adapt, resourceful in the face of scarcity, and unwilling to cling to what no longer worked. It forces us to ask, have we in our high-tech world unconsciously circled back to the lessons of the nomads? Is the future less about permanence and stability, and more about fluidity, mobility, and resilience? But this legacy goes beyond survival and innovation. For if the nomadic mindset shaped how we adapt and work today, their cultural exchanges reshape the very world we inhabit, altering science, art, and knowledge itself. And the most astonishing part? These contributions have often been erased, forgotten, or dismissed. So the question is, what if the greatest gift of the nomads was not their conquests, not even their adaptability, but the cultural legacy they left behind, one still hiding in plain sight? For centuries, the legacy of nomadic empires has been reduced to a single story: conquest. Cities burned, kingdoms shattered, empires toppled beneath the hooves of mounted warriors. Yet this image blinds us to a deeper truth, that alongside destruction came creation, and alongside fear came exchange. Consider the sciences. The Mongols did not just wage war, they facilitated the transfer of knowledge across continents. Chinese innovations like gunpowder, papermaking, and the compass reached Europe through their networks. At the same time, Islamic medical texts, mathematics, and astronomy traveled eastward. Without this bridge of exchange, the Renaissance itself might have taken a very different shape. Consider culture. Nomadic courts were melting pots of languages, religions, and traditions. From Persian poets to Chinese artisans, talent flowed where it was valued. The result was not cultural erasure, but fusion. New forms of art, architecture, and philosophy born from the mingling of worlds. Even cuisines bear traces of this blending, with ingredients and techniques crossing borders along the same routes once guarded by nomadic rulers. And consider identity. The idea that civilizations are isolated, self-contained, and independent of one another is a myth. The truth is more complicated and more compelling. The nomads proved that the world has always been interconnected, that no culture evolves in isolation. What we think of as Western or Eastern achievements are in many cases the products of centuries of exchange facilitated by those who refused to be tied down. So why has this story been hidden? Perhaps because victors write history, and the sedentary powers that eventually outlasted the nomads preferred to see themselves as self-made, untouched by the influence of the steppes. To admit otherwise would be to acknowledge that the barbarians they feared were in fact among their greatest teachers. But when we strip away the myths, we uncover something powerful: the recognition that mobility, adaptability, and exchange are not relics of the past, they are the engines of the present. From global trade networks to digital communication, from cultural fusion to flexible lifestyles, the fingerprints of nomadic empires are everywhere. And so we return to the question that has guided us: how does the life of people who vanished centuries ago still shape the world we inhabit? The answer lies all around us, in the technologies we use, the economies we depend on, the diplomacy we witness, and the culture we share. But perhaps the more unsettling question is this: what does it mean for our future? If the nomadic mindset of adaptability and resilience was the key to survival in the past, could it also be the key to navigating the uncertainties of tomorrow? In an age of climate change, shifting economies, and global instability, are we once again being called to live as nomads, less tied to permanence, more attuned to movement? The story of the nomads is not simply history. It is a mirror, showing us who we are and who we might become. Their legacy whispers through the corridors of power, pulses through the networks of trade, and flows in the cultural currents of our daily lives.
The conquerors we once feared may, in truth, be the architects of the very world we now take for granted. So I'll leave you with this. The next time you open a package shipped across the globe, connect with someone a continent away, or adapt to a sudden change in your own life, ask yourself, are you too living in the shadow of the steppe? Let me know what you think in the comments. Do you see the fingerprints of nomadic empires in our world today? And if so, how might they shape the world yet to come? If you enjoyed this journey into hidden history, don't forget to subscribe for more stories that challenge what we think we know about the past and how it still defines our future.